Amen. Please remain standing if you would. And if you're new here, we have a tradition. We like to acknowledge where our authority comes from. So if you have a copy of the Scriptures, and if you'd like to hold it up, and if you'd like to repeat after me, you can do so. This is my Bible, God's holy word. It's a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. It is inerrant. It is infallible. It is authoritative. It is sharper than any two-edged sword. Fire shut up in my bones. I must speak it. It's food for my soul. I am ready to receive it. We're going to go to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. Jesus has a large crowd gathered there, and his disciples are gathered right up next to him. And we're just going to look at 3 verses in Matthew chapter 6. There's one thing I want you to notice from each of these 3 verses. We're going to begin in verse 2. And I want you to notice the word when in each one. Matthew 6:2. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. Verse 5, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corner of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you that they have their reward. Verse 16, moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. You may be seated. We are in our last day of 28 days of prayer and fasting, and I hope that you started the year praying more than you ever have before. Let me ask you a question. How many of you believe that God can do things bigger than you can? How about faster? How about more long-lasting? Well, if you actually believe that, you will pray. And 2019, we'd like to see it be a year where God does more in us, for us, and through us than ever before. And one way to make that happen is to go to Him in prayer. Today we're going to talk not only about prayer, but also about fasting, the spiritual discipline of fasting. Now, I know some of you looked at the title, hear me say that, and you're checking out. You're like, I don't want to talk about fasting. Well, let me ask you a question. Is there anybody in this room that has an impossible situation? Or maybe you're facing a difficult decision, or you've got a health issue that is overwhelming, or there's yourself or someone you love is bound up in anxiety or depression or bitterness or fear, or addicted to alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex. Maybe there's somebody you love that is far from God. If any of those things are true, you're going to want to hear everything I say today about prayer and fasting. So we're going to talk about the spiritual discipline of fasting. And by the end of this message, you will be one of those people that won't say to me, like most times when I talk about fasting, people come up to me and go, I never heard that part before. You're going to hear a lot of it today. So fasten your seatbelts, here we go. Number 1, fasting is an expected spiritual discipline. It's an expected spiritual practice. We just read Matthew 6 where Jesus assumed that his followers would do 3 things. He assumed that they would give to the poor. He assumed that they would pray. And he likewise assumed that they would fast. When you do your charitable deeds for the poor, when you pray, and when you fast. It's expected that we would do ministry to the poor. By the way, when do you do your ministry to the poor? When do you give to the poor? It's expected that we would pray. When do you pray? But it's also expected that we would fast. When do you fast? When was the last time that you fasted? Second aspect of number 1B, Jesus assumed that after he left, his disciples would fast. Matthew chapter 9, verse 14 and 15. When the disciples of John came to him saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Now listen, Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom," talking about himself, as we just sang, we are the bride of Christ, "can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the day will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them." Jesus died, rose again, walked on earth for 40 days, and ascended into heaven. That day has come. And he says, and then they will fast. He assumed that his followers would be fasting after he left. The third thing under number 1C, first century Christians fasted 2 days a week. 2 days a week. Let me read to you something out of the First Christian Encyclopedia. It was written in 360 A.D. Epiphanes wrote, "Who doesn't know that the fast of the 4th and the 6 days of the week," that's Wednesday and Friday, "who doesn't know that they're observed by Christians throughout the world?" So if you were a Christian in First Baptist Church of Jerusalem in the first few hundred years of Christianity, or the First Baptist Church of Antioch, or the church in Ephesus, you would fast at least one of those 2 days a week. It was expected. It was known. Jesus had said, when you fast, he had said, then you will fast, and they fasted. Interesting. The first century of Christianity, 35 A.D. until the end of that century, Christianity went from 120 people in an upper room to 1 million followers of Jesus Christ. If we want what they had, maybe we should do what they did. And they fasted 1 or 2 days a week. What day a week do you fast? What's your day of fasting, or which 2 days a week do you fast? Fasting is an expected spiritual practice. The second thing I want you to see, it's simple. Number 2, fasting is a simple spiritual practice. Anybody can do it. Fasting is used in the Bible means do not eat. Self-denial. Fasting is when you don't eat that meal, you spend that time with God praying instead. B, a normal fast involves fasting from all food but not from water. You got to have water, but you can go at least 40 days without food. Fasting from all food. C, a partial fast is a restriction of one's diet as opposed to complete abstention. Daniel, chapter 1, chapter 10. We see that Daniel, young man serving in the cabinet of the king of Babylon, fasted from the king's delicacies, but he still ate some vegetables and some fruit. A lot of people call that a Daniel fast, a modified fast. You limit your diet. When I do a longer fast, I have juice because of blood sugar. If I do a longer than that diet, I add in a smoothie that's made with some vegetables and some fruits. If I do a very long fast, I add in a boost or some Ensure about once a day, just so I don't drop too much weight. The other aspect of partial fasting is a lot of times when somebody does a fast, they also fast from media, from television, from their phone. You know, maybe it would be a good spiritual practice to have a day a week where you limit your social media. D, typically biblical fasting went from one complete 24-hour period, usually sundown to sundown. David said that he prayed, and let me give it to you this way. Typical Jewish person, the day began at 6 p.m. the night before. So, they fasted on Wednesdays. That means they ate dinner Tuesday night and then did not eat again until dinner on Wednesday night. 24 hours from sundown to sundown. That's what John Wesley did that Tuesdays and Thursdays. E, in the Bible there are individual and corporate fast. An individual fast is me and God. Now when I fast, I always tell Kathy because she prepares the meals. So she knows when I'm fasting. A corporate fast is when a church or a nation fasts. There have been times in the history of this country and in England and certainly in the Old Testament, when they called the entire nation to fast because of military situations. The church we led in Gehenna, several times we called our church to 8 days of prayer and fasting from Sunday to Sunday. One of the results of one of those 8 days was we had a friend day on that Sunday, and 50 people were born again that day. That's a good day. Prayer and fasting for loved ones was a key to that happening. So fasting is simple. You can do it. Turn the person next to you and go, you can do it. You can do it. All of you can eat, obviously. So it's very simple. Just one meal, 2 meals, 3 meals, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Instead of eating, you pray. I wonder how many of you have a situation that's just overwhelming, a situation that seems impossible, a loved one that is hurting, a loved one in bondage, a loved one who is far from God, a loved one who is bound up in lies. I wonder how many of you are dealing with you or somebody you love with a health matter, a financial matter, something that's impacting your business, your job. Are you fasting about this? Fasting is expected. It's a simple spiritual discipline. The third thing I want you to see, it's a powerful spiritual practice. When I was a new Christian, I heard somebody talk about fasting, and I wanted to know more about it. So I read every reference in the Bible to fasting. And I did so with this attitude, why would I fast? I'm a person, I love to eat. I eat 6 times a day. I have a high metabolism. I was a young guy, high metabolism, look forward to every meal. You know, just, you couldn't give me enough to eat. Why would I not eat? Why is this a good idea? So I started in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, the first mention, and looked at every incident of fasting. I'm going to give you just some of the reasons, some of the benefits, some of the accounts of people fasting and God doing God things as a result. Number 1, fasting held back the judgment of God. Israel had sinned. God was upset. He was going to destroy Israel. Moses not only interceded for Israel, but he fasted 40 days for God to hold back judgment. This last Tuesday, I was down at the State House. It was the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision to legalize abortion. 46th anniversary. In those 46 years, 56 million babies have been killed. Our nation deserves judgment. You look at some of the other decisions that have been made the last few years, we deserve the judgment of God. Thank God that there's a group of people in this country that spend time fasting and praying just for this issue, for God to withhold judgment. We need to go beyond that and not only ask God to withhold judgment, we need to ask God to pour out revival. Number 2, fasting with desperate prayer gave Hannah a stunning answer to prayer. She really needed and wanted to have a baby. Her biological clock was at the point where this was her last shot pretty much. She went into a time of very intense, passionate fasting and praying. God heard her. She got pregnant and had a son whose name, Samuel. Hebrew, it means God heard my prayer. The praying prophet. We preached on Samuel 1 week, leading into 8 days of prayer and fasting, and a lady who just started coming to our church came back to God. Her name was Rhonda. Heard about Hannah and applied it to her situation. She had a daughter named Megan, who, when she graduated, took off, and Mom hadn't heard or seen anything of Megan for 6 months. She began to fast and pray for her daughter, Megan. On Thursday night, the phone rang. Mom, this is Megan. Can we get together? Megan came to church. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, I baptized Megan. Yay, God. Do you have a loved one that's far from God? Do you have a loved one that needs to hear the voice of God calling them, speaking to them, prompting them? Have you tried fasting with your praying? Number 3, fasting brought unexpected victories. Love 2 Chronicles 20. You got the story of Jehoshaphat, jumping Jehoshaphat. He was in a bad state. There was a massive army that was ready to wipe him out, Israel out. So King Jehoshaphat called the nation to a time of prayer and fasting, and God gave them a plan, an unusual military plan. The plan was to send the worship team first into battle. I would love to watch the video. I want to hear what the worship team had to say about that. It says in 2 Chronicles 20 that the moment they began to praise and give thanks, the moment they began, God set ambushes and defeated every one of their enemies. They didn't have to do any fighting. God fought the battle for them. It was a victory won by prayer and fasting and praise and thanksgiving. Do you need God to fight a battle for you? Have you done your part with prayer and fasting? Number 4, David regularly humbled himself through fasting. He's a man after God's own heart. He said it was his practice to humble himself with fasting. I have an issue with gluttony. I've told you, I've confessed. I love to eat. You say, well, you don't look like somebody that has an issue with gluttony. Well, if you fast regularly, I do it with, and I say this to God when I'm hungry. I say, God, I love you more than I love food. And I love you more than this person and this person that I'm praying for. Maybe there's something in your life that you need to deal with. Do you love God more than pornography? Do you love God more than food? Do you love God more than alcohol? Do you love God more than drugs? Do you love God more than exercise? Do you love God more than fear? Do you love God more than worry? Fasting is a reminder of those things and gives you victory in those areas. Number 5, fasting provided God's protection. Ezra, the priest, had to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. They fasted and prayed, and God gave them supernatural protection to make that happen. Number 6, fasting yielded a plan and provision. At the same time, Nehemiah, working for the king in Babylon, heard that the Jewish people, his people in Jerusalem, were in reproach. The city was in ruin. The walls had been torn down. They had no protection, so he asked God to give him a plan, to give him provision, and give him protection. And he fasted and prayed, and God supernaturally gave him all those things. Do you need direction? Do you need provision? Do you need the protection of God? Have you added in fasting? Number 7, fasting rescued an entire nation. The book of Esther. Wicked king had gotten influenced by a wicked man named Haman in the Persian nation to destroy all the Jewish people. Esther called her people to fast. God, in incredible poetic irony, turned everything around so all the enemies, all the leaders that were trying to make this happen, all lost their positions and lost their lives. God elevated Jews to take their place. The Jews were not only saved, but all their enemies were defeated, and the Jews were promoted, and the glory of God was given. Yay, God. That's because of fasting. Verse number 8. There's so much in Isaiah 58, but let me just give you the highlights. Fasting has the power to please God. That's a good enough reason to do it. But beyond that, it enables and pleases God to loose the chains of injustice, set the oppressed free, provide for the hungry, the homeless, and the naked. You know, if everybody in the church fasted one day a week and just took that money used for food, we can make a big dent in hunger and homelessness in this country. The person fasting, it causes your righteousness to shine. It causes healing to come. Causes God's glory to surround you, and it leads to answered prayer. Why fast? Let me ask you a question. Why not? Number 9, it purifies your soul and body. Daniel. I like to fast about 3 days, twice a year, just for a physical and spiritual detox. And I take the extra time praying, and I just go deeper in confessing sin, in dealing with bitterness, making sure that there's just nothing between me and God. Number 10, fasting makes prayer more effective. I love Daniel chapter 10 because I can relate. The background is Daniel's a prophet, and he's a cabinet member for the king in Babylon, Persia, the Median and Persian Empire at that time. He needs to hear something from God about something Jeremiah had written. So he goes into prayer and fasting so God would give him an answer. And he fasts and prays day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He's been praying and fasting for 21 days. And then the angel Gabriel shows up. And Gabriel says the most fascinating thing. Daniel 10, verse 12. He said to me, "Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I came because of your words." God sent an answer from the very first day. Some of you have been praying about someone or something for a while and you're wondering, does God listen? Does God care? Maybe God has already sent that answer when you first started praying. But then he says something very interesting. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia, the demon prince of the spiritual principality of Persia and his army, withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, the archangel, one of the chief priests in the kingdom of heaven, came to help me, for I was left alone with the demon kings of Persia. What's he saying? He said, God sent me an angel to give you an answer 21 days ago when you first started praying, but it took 21 days to get through because there was spiritual opposition. What we don't realize is we just see what we see, and we don't realize there's a whole world of stuff going on in the spiritual dimension. And when you pray and God sends answers, sometimes spiritual warfare is enacted. Why should you persist, pray until something happens? Why should you do that? In part because maybe your fasting, your praying day after day is necessary to get this answer through. God sends an answer often the moment we begin to pray, but that prayer can spark spiritual warfare. Your answer can get hindered by spiritual warfare. Persistence in praying is a part of defeating spiritual warfare, and fasting seems to be essential in that process. So, what am I saying? I'm saying some of you have grown discouraged because you've been praying for something and you haven't seen your answer yet. I want to encourage you to keep praying and fasting. What if Daniel, I want to ask God this, I want to ask Daniel this, what if he'd quit after day 3, or after day 10, or after day 14, or after day 21? Is there a situation in your life where you want to see God break through? Where you want to see an answer break through? Maybe you need to approach it with persistent prayer and fasting. Number 11, fasting brought a nation back to God, Israel. Read Joel chapter 2. Number 12, fasting prepares us for the return of Jesus, the bridegroom. We're the bride, he's the bridegroom. He says, you're going to fast after I leave, preparing for me to return. Why hasn't Jesus come back yet? Maybe he's waiting for his bride he's obviously waiting for his bride to be prepared. And maybe that's a slow process because we're not doing our part with fasting. Number 13, fasting is an expression of repentance. Jonah ran away from God. The assignment that he ran away from was sharing a message of judgment with the city-state of Nineveh, a city of 100,000 people. When he finally obeyed God and got vomited out by the whale on the shore of Nineveh, he gave them the message that God had given them, and they repented, and God delivered them. Some of you in this room are not where you could be with God because in your mind, in your heart, you think, I have done something that limits me from ever really being there with God. Repentance is empowered by prayer and fasting. The question really isn't why should we fast? The question is why don't we fast more often? Turn to the person next to you and go, why don't we fast more often? Fasting is a spiritual service. In the Christmas story, we often lose sight of Anna. She was a widow in her 80s who served God with Day and night, it says, with prayer and fasting. That was her ministry. When I was a younger man, I was speaking at a group of missionaries to Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists. During a break in one of the sessions, I was eating lunch, sitting at a table with a bunch of retired missionaries from Iran. And I said something that they thought was stupid and funny. I said, "Don't you miss your ministry in Iran?" And one of them looked at me like, "You just don't see it, do you?" And they said, "We miss our ministry. We have more ministry in Iran than we ever did. Because we have time, now that we're retired, to spend hours a day fasting and praying for all the missionaries and all the ministries and all the cities and all the villages in Iran." If you know anything about global missions, you know that right after that, Muslims began having dreams about Jesus, and in villages all around Iran, people began coming to Christ. Say, "Yay, God." It's a spiritual service. We have a lot of, in this auditorium, we have more gray-haired people than we do in the other auditorium. Some of us have gone past gray to white. Some of us have gone past that to flesh-colored. Some of you would say, "I just don't have the energy to have the ministry I used to have." Well, it doesn't take a lot to fast and pray. There's an elderly lady, Fran Kennett. She can't hardly get around. Everything she can do to get here on Sundays. She came out today, and her eyes were twinkling. And she said, "I love my ministry. And I pray for you at 8:30 every day." And she said, "I prayed God would speak in that worship service today." Thank God for her ministry. Say, "I'm retired." I really appreciate the folks who came at 8:30 every day the last 28 days in this room. Ministering with prayer, even though many of them were retired. Why don't we fast? Why don't we pray? What's holding us back? 15, fasting increases spiritual power and prepares us for greater impact. Jesus fasted 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. You know that. But what you might not know is he never preached a sermon or did a single miracle until after those 40 days of prayer and fasting. It says, and then he went out in the power of the Holy Spirit. You teach Sunday school, you work in Awana, you have conversations with your kids and grandkids. Is the power of God on those conversations? Is the power of God in that ministry? You want an increase of the power of God and the impact of your ministry? Prayer and fasting. 16. Fasting is a secret service to God that leads to open rewards. We read these verses in Matthew 6 at the beginning where he says, don't do it to be seen among men. But in each of those cases, he came back and he says, but if you do it as a secret service to God, the God who sees in secret will reward you openly. There are some rewards we will get because of the goodness and grace of God through the blood of Jesus. There's rewards we get for living our life right down here on earth. But there are some rewards we're not going to receive unless we do what he says when it comes to giving and ministering to the poor, prayer, and fasting. You only got to live once. I'll be honest with you. I want everything God got for me and my family. 17, fasting obeys the implied command of Jesus when he says, when you fast, and then you will fast. I don't want to stand before God and God go, you know what? Why didn't you do it? What were you thinking? You're talking about going on a diet. If you just fasted and prayed one day a week, that would kind of take care of a lot of stuff for you. If you jump-start it with a 3 or 4 day fast, it gets you going in the right direction. You're upset about your family member. You're upset about this situation. You're upset about this thing that's not happening. Did you fast about it? Last one, fasting. 17, fasting is a powerful aid in spiritual warfare. Jesus said some of these demons don't come out except by prayer and fasting. Look at me for a second. Some of you have family members who are hurting and in bondage, and they will not be set free without prayer and fasting. Last one, fasting aids in decision making. Church of Antioch fasted and then got the bright idea to send Barnabas and Paul out as missionaries, the two greatest missionaries who planted churches all around the Mediterranean. And they went back to all those churches and led them to pray and fast to choose the right leaders for those churches. You got to make a big decision. Have you added fasting? All right, look at me. Let me tell you what happened to me. I finished going through all those verses. And I changed in my thinking from why should I fast to why do I not fast and why don't I fast more often. So I began a 3-day fast. And I asked God to do 4 things. Number 1, we had 3 students from my school that were representing the school. One was a preacher, one was a musician, and one was a singer. The singer's name was Mark Lowry. You ever heard of him? They were in a terrible accident, and they were all supposed to not make it. So a lot of us in our school were praying for them, and they were the number 1 thing on my list. The second thing on my list, I had 2 friends that were going to get kicked out of school if they couldn't pay their school bill. Back then, they didn't have school loans, so you either had the money or you didn't. So I asked God to give me the money to give to them to pay for their loans. Not their loans, their school bills. The third thing I asked for, I said, God, give me a mentor, a professor to mentor me. And number 4, I said, God, I want to lead 50 people to Jesus this month in the next 30 days. Well, I asked the professor. He agreed to mentor me. He never followed through very well, but I think God did his part. That next week, I got 2 checks in the mail that completely paid both of those guys' school bills. Prayed for those 3 students. All of them pulled through. Mark Lowry, you know about. 50 souls. I realized a couple days into this that I might have made a mistake. I lived at a Christian college on a mountain with no car, and everyone in my dorm and every one of my teachers and everyone that worked in the cafeteria were Christians. I'm like, I'm not even going to see 50 lost people, let alone lead 50 lost people to Jesus. Well, the telephone repairman came in. You actually had those back in the day. So I sat there and talked to him, and we got a great conversation. I led him to Jesus. That's 1 out of 50. That next weekend, my school was having this big Christian haunted house, and the guy that was supposed to share the gospel at the end of it got sick, and they asked me to share the gospel, so I shared the gospel, and in my night, 21 students, high school students, gave their life to Jesus. Say, yay, God. That's awesome. That's 22 people. That's not 50. Get to the end of the month, and I am speaking at this youth retreat of a bunch of churches in this county in rural southern Ohio. 150 students, and I'm speaking one time on Friday night. So I start speaking, and if you're not a speaker, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about, but I get about 5 minutes into it, and I'm thinking, this has got to be the worst sermon I've ever heard in my life. And obviously, all the students were thinking the exact same thing. So I'm like, God, help me. So I just stopped. I said, stop, forget that. I said, this is what I want to do. I want every one of you, starting with you, to stand up and tell us what your spiritual temperature is right now. 10 would mean you're on fire for Jesus. 1 would mean you're not. Girl number 1 gets up and goes, I'm a 5. I'm a 4. I'm a 6. I'm a 5. I'm a 4. I'm a 5. Partway into that, this kid stands up, the ringleader of the bad kids, and says, I'm a 0. We go through this, and I just want to read you a verse of the Bible. Revelation chapter 3. Jesus said, I know your works, that you're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you're lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. I said, what do you think God thinks of your spiritual temperature tonight? And the first girl started crying. And I don't remember what I said after that. I want to watch the video when I get there. But the next thing I know, every single kid is on their knees. Mr. 0, the presence of God is so powerful, just crushes him face down flat in the ground. The kids start repenting. It goes on and on. About 12:30, I was so tired, I went to bed. The next morning, I'm sitting there at breakfast, and the leader of this retreat, he said, I've been up all night. I said, wow. He said, that was the most amazing thing. He said, 28. I said, 28 what? He said, 28 kids were born again last night. I said, are you sure it's 28? He said, 28. He said, they are born again. They've been bringing me cigarettes and booze and pornography and pot all night long. He said, we fasted and prayed, and we had a list of kids. 28 got saved last night. Do you need God to do a God-sized thing for you? For your family, in your health, your situation, your finances, your business? Are you praying until something happens? Are you fasting until something happens? Do you want to be freed from your anxiety and fear and depression? You want to be freed from your addiction? What would you do if I started right over here and said, I want you to stand up and give us your spiritual temperature today? What does Jesus think about it? Is there somebody you love enough, more than food, that you're willing to fast and pray until something happens? Our altars will be open for you. Let's stand together. Father, in the name of Jesus, you know the situations. Almost everyone in this room has a situation, has a loved one. God, help us do our part. We believe you want to do your part to make it easy for them to do their part. We ask in your holy name, amen.